be back in Lyme. As many of you know, I lived here for a number of years, from roughly 2007 through I think it was about 2014. I have my credits here. I've got my Lyme hat, which I wear all the time. I've got 2 of these, so I think they're going to last me my lifetime. So my name is Sam Greene. I recently was anointed, or I didn't run away in time to become the director of the Municipal and Property Division of the Department of Revenue. So what does that mean? Well, we basically are in charge of everything that's assessing and everything that's tax rate setting. So when you think about your town meeting, and the first thing that happens in the scheme of taxes is town meeting for most towns. And it's made up, we have a crew in our municipal division that does things like make sure that your warrant articles are correct, and that everything leading into town meeting is done correctly, and then when you actually had your town meeting, you've appropriated everything correctly, and then the MS1 is basically your report of your assessed value. That's supposed to get turned in September 1 or thereabouts, and then we set the tax rates. So that's kind of the monetary side. And then my background is as a real estate appraiser, and I've been monitoring the assessing work. I've worked in the North District, that's when I lived here in Lyme, and I've also done that in the West District. So, and I'm waiting for Phil Bodwell to arrive. He's the current North District supervisor, so he's in charge of really monitoring basically Hanover all the way up to Pittsburgh and down along the main border and there. So I want to just really quickly, I passed around just some really quick information sheets. I kind of want to start big. So there's a requirement in the state of New Hampshire. It's in the Constitution. Part 2, Article 6 of the Constitution requires revaluations. On the second page, the first paragraph, requires evaluation of property every 5 years. It's a little bit different than in Vermont, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit. But Vermont has a different, you don't need to do it every 5 years. So some towns in Vermont, it's been probably 20 years, or close to 20 years, since they've done it last. So we have this, this requirement to do a revaluation, whether you need it or not, which is kind of an interesting thing. And your 2021 reval was a little bit like that, but we'll get into that in a second. So then RSA 75-8A is the statutory requirement for the 5-year revaluation. So basically no town that I'm aware of in the last 20 years has gotten away without doing a reval every 5 years. And that's definitely first and foremost on our list of things to do, is to make sure that everybody has done it at least as often as every 5 years. We'll talk about, that's an important point, at least as often as. So there's really 3 ways you can do a revaluation. Okay, you can do a full revaluation, which is the old style way of doing a revaluation. The state of New Hampshire used to do these revaluations. We were one of the providers of revaluation work. And that's when you basically, a boatload of people come in from the assessing company or the state. They measure and list the entire community. They look at sales, they look at qualified sales. They do analysis, and they apply that analysis to all the sales and also to the non-sales within the community. So this is Phil Bodwell. I told you he was going to be late, didn't I?
I wrote the Warford.
Okay. Be careful, because Rusty's here. Complain to Rusty about that. So, anyways, so full revaluation is the old style revaluation. And it's not used very much anymore because it's a big effort by an assessing company, and the assessing companies are overworked as it is right now. It's kind of a gold-plated revaluation. They're not usually done unless it's a BTLA-ordered revaluation or court-ordered revaluation. Then this probably the most common kind of revaluation right now is a cyclical revaluation. So cyclical revaluation is what you're doing here in Lyme. It involves measuring and listing a certain percentage of properties over, it could be over 2 years, it could be 3 years, it could be 4 years, it could be 10 years. Okay? Cities like Lebanon kind of do it as they can. So they may have an assessing personnel who, if they get to 200 a year, they get to 200, maybe they've got a light year and they get to 1,000 properties. But the idea is that eventually they've measured and listed all the properties. And why do you want to measure and list all the properties? Well, basically to keep up on the properties that are out there. We want to make sure that, if Rusty puts on a new shed, I want to pick on Rusty a lot today. Puts a new shed on, we're going to add, that the assessor's going to pick up Rusty's shed as of April 1st of this year, or the year that it was built. And, or a new addition, or anything else that may be learned from seeing a property. Now, importantly, cyclical revaluations are not required. Okay, or I should say that the cyclical aspect of a cyclical revaluation is not a required thing. So you're not required to do a systematic measuring and listing of properties. And I know that in Lyme, when Diana Calder was the assessor here, she would do 5 years on, 5 years off. 5 years on, 5 years off. Okay, for smaller towns, doing continual cyclical inspections, not necessarily going to pay for itself. And I will oftentimes either recommend or not recommend it, but that's up to the town. And it largely depends on how good a job your town does at keeping track of things like new construction, you have a good building permit process. Towns like Lyme, Hanover, the Upper Valley, you probably have a fairly robust process for picking up changes to property. Not the least of which is the old tattletale method, which is when somebody calls up and says, my next door neighbor, they've got a custom kitchen truck in the driveway, you gotta get out there. That works, but it's dependent on people being tattletales. Up north, where Phil does a lot of his work, they don't really have, a lot of small towns have no new construction, no way of picking up new construction. They're not paying attention to it, maybe they don't have a building permit process. Maybe the only time anybody looks at a new house is when the selectmen go out and bless the heating system or something, or the fire chief or something. So the last one, which is the cheap, I call it the cheap and dirty, but it's perfectly fine, is the full statistical revaluation. Okay? So it is a once, at least as often as once every 5-year revaluation. Okay? A lot of towns are doing it more often than that because of the market. This market's just been crazy the last 3 years. Towns like Molten Borough, which is on the water, does it. They do a revaluation every year. A lot of towns on water will do that to capture the value on waterfront, because there always seems to be people that are willing to move up here from wherever and put down way more money on a waterfront property than you would ever imagine they would. So by doing revaluations on an annual basis, they're capturing that value and keeping things fair for the rest of the people that live in Wilkesboro, who may live in the woods or in a mobile home or in a condo or in a non-influenced location. So the other time that we see a lot of full statistical revaluations are in places like Hillsborough, Rockingham County, Merrimack, where there's a lot of commercial base, maybe Lebanon. And that would be done in order to kind of keep the commercial and the residential property pretty even. I'm sure you're all aware of the fact that Lebanon in the last year has done a revaluation. Now normally when you do a revaluation, the assessments go up, tax rate drops, and everybody feels relatively happy about what's happening. What happened in Lebanon has been happening all over southern New Hampshire, and that is that there's been a general shift from from commercial to residential. So what happened in Lebanon is, even though the residential values went up, tax rate went down, it didn't go down as much as it would have if the commercial properties had increased in value at the same rate as residential values. And I'm going to tell you that happened, and this is happening in Portsmouth, and Manchester and Nashua and Hudson, and you name it. If there's a significant commercial base, let's face it, what happened during the pandemic? People stopped walking into malls, but they moved here from somewhere else and bought a $2 million house.
Happened with Littleton, Gorham, and Berlin, too.
Yeah, it's not just the south part of the state. So I want to just cover one more reval, which is not considered values in NIM, and that's a partial update. So in mostly Rockingham, Hillsborough County, sometimes an assessor will do a partial update. So let's just say that residential values at 70% of market value, and the commercial is still at 100% because it hasn't moved. But the residential property, when I say 70% of market value, that's an indicator that the market has gone up roughly 30 basis points. And so the residential properties have gone up, the ratio has gone down to 70. But if commercial has not really moved, then there's going to be a lot of basis for commercial abatements. And so a lot of times in the south part of the state especially, they will do a partial update and to try to keep commercial property and residential property on an even keel. So what they're really doing is moving the commercial property to where the residential property is, or vice versa, so that there's less chance of a lot of abatement requests on the part of high-end commercial properties. So again, the takeaway is you have to do a reval every 5 years statutorily. You can do it more often than within the 5-year period. You folks are at a situation where in 2020, unfortunately, because of the market, the 2020 to 2021 market didn't change that much. But you were in that 5-year reval, you had to do it. And so that ratio and the indicator of values really didn't change dramatically. It would have been almost a better scenario if this was your statutory year to do it. However, let me just quickly cover the 3 types of cyclical, or rather assessing work. There's general assessing work, which your assessor, Todd Hayward, does on behalf of the municipal assessing officials, who are your selectmen. Okay? They are the statutory guardians of your assessing work. Okay? But most people in the state, most selectmen in the state of New Hampshire are not qualified to appraise or perform municipal assessing work, so they hire out, the vast majority of the cases, towns hire out to a contract assessor. There are still towns and cities with either full or part-time staff assessors. So there's general assessing work, which usually involves things like picking up April 1, what changed as of April 1. It's a new house, it's assessed as of April 1. A deck assessed as of April 1. A barn that has been demolished, and once April 1 rolls around, it shouldn't be on the property record card anymore. So Todd's duty is to, as close to April 1, get out to all the properties in town, in all the towns he works in. And we have assessors that literally have I think the largest assessor in the state has 60 or 70 towns. So you can imagine the challenge of getting out to all their properties reasonably close to April 1. They're not going to be out there on April 1, but really within a month or so of April 1. That way they know what was built as of April 1. If they don't get out there until July 15th, and they see a deck that looks kind of new, was that deck built April 1 or was it built April 15th? If it was built April 15th, it's not taxable until the following year. So think of April 1 as being an as-of date for assessment. And then there's cyclical inspection work, which again is an optional thing, and a lot of towns do it every 5 years, and a lot of towns don't do it enough. Right? Nashua had to do a reval last year, but it's been in the works. They really haven't done a systematic measuring and listing of all the properties in Nashua for close to 30 years. So, so there's no statutory requirement to do inspection work. Is it a good idea? Absolutely. Because if you do the best analysis in the world and during a reevaluation and apply it to crappy data, you're going to end up with bad result. So the last thing is revaluation. Again, you have to do a revaluation every 5 years, at least as often. So if you go to the second page that I've provided, I've got two ratio studies. The first one is 2020. I don't know, did you do color versions? Or, okay. So in the yellow, these are the things I really look at. Okay. Under the column that says median ratio, you don't have a lot of different house types. Okay. You have single-family homes, and you have some. I know you've got some manufacturing housing on land. You've got a handful of condos. If there's no sales, there's not going to be a line for a certain housing type. So there's probably no commercial sales in 2020. There's probably no condominium sales in 2020. And in this case, it looks like there was one manufactured housing with land sale, as opposed to manufactured housing in a park, which you don't have. There was one valid sale, so there's a line for that, but it's not a statistically meaningful. There's no calculation there. So really, in 2020, you have single-family homes were assessed at 87% of market value, and any and all, which is basically the total of all the sales put together, of all the valid sales put together, was 88.19. So as I indicated before, it's kind of too bad that 2021 was your required revaluation year, because in 2021, not much changed as far as the market goes. So if you look at single family, if you go to any and all, you have 94% for a ratio. Your single family homes were at 88. There was a handful of condo units, but not enough to, really 4 is not a very statistically valid number, even though that calculation is there. So really in a town like Lyme, usually the only group that's got a statistically valid number of sales is going to be single family homes, or maybe vacant land. So anyways, 2021 shows the results of the revaluation that Todd did. And it's important to realize that we do our ratio study, the sales are included in our ratio study are 6 months prior to April 1, the as-of date of the revaluation, and 6 months after. So, and that's always the case. That's our equalization period.
So it's October 1st to September 30th.
Yeah, so, I'm sorry. Yeah. So the equalization period that we take our statistics from are October 1 through to September 31st of the following year. The next page actually arrays all the median ratios. Now again, the median ratio is,
Is this including current use properties?
Yeah, I'm gonna speak to.
Is this then the appraised or the assessed value?
So that would be, no, I'm sorry, it does not include the current use properties. But I know that there's a question on that. And
and valid means the number of properties that were actually included.
Yeah, so the actual properties that were included in 2021 would be 24 valid sales.
Yeah.
And as opposed to the 44 total sales. Okay.
And what does UT mean?
Untrimmed. So sometimes there's outlying sales that are just, something sells for 300% of what it's worth, or a third, but sometimes they're just thrown out because they're just too crazy. It's important to realize that the real estate market is not a perfect market. It's not like if you buy, stocks, you know what the stock's worth for the moment you buy it, right? You buy it for a certain, amount. And there's, shares traded during the day, and if it's, you know when to buy, you know when to sell. You may not know what the long-term consequence of that is, but the real estate market is very, a difficult market for an assessor or an appraiser to calculate. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I was appraising real estate in the early 2000s when 9/11 occurred, and I thought the market was going to, like, you know, do certain things. Well, the market did totally different things because of what happened on 9/11. And of course, that depended where you were. You know, if you were in New York City, one thing happened. If you were in the outskirts of New York City, where people were fleeing to, or maybe even in rural America, it just changed everything. Same with COVID. The market is very fickle. And during the very beginning of COVID, I spent a weekend in Portland, Maine, and I was thinking, coming home, I'm like, this is going to be awful for the real estate market. This is going to be, what's going to happen? I mean, I was just like, and then look what happened. I mean, if you were selling a house 6 months later, you were in great shape. Of course, you have to find one to buy, etc. So, anyways, hopefully I answered that.
Yeah,
I want to talk.
Just when you calculate the median ratio, are you using the untrimmed or the trimmed values?
So it's the valid sales, so it's basically untrimmed. So we trim out the stuff that's not.
It's trimmed.
Yeah, untrimmed number I think was, yes, yeah, so it's trimmed. UT is trimmed, yeah, which is counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Talk to Linda Trinity, is the equalization supervisor. About 40 years, so don't tell her what she doesn't know what she's doing either. All right, so anyways, I just wanted to give you a point of comparison on the next page. We have 2021 median ratio list. Okay, so this is arrayed from, well, you can forget Livermore, because Livermore is it's not even unincorporated, it's what's the name of that?
Well, it's unincorporated, it's mentioned there, but it's unincorporated.
Yeah.
Plus national forest.
Yeah. So Bartlett, okay, Bartlett, and again, these are 2021 sales. One thing really important to remember. Some of these towns may have done a revaluation last year, okay? Or it might be in the midst of doing a revaluation this year. So this is always a moving target, and it would have been great if we were meeting in May and we had a whole list of 2022 ratios, but we can't do that. But it would have been also great if this was 2 or 3 weeks from now, and maybe there was a ratio study for Lyme for 2022. But I think the situation was that Todd's contract and the selectmen, came to an agreement on a contract. He can't do any assessing work until he's got a contract for a given year. So at this point, I think the contract's done deal, and you guys can go ahead and do a ratio study, and we can talk about that. Would be your next step, I think, before any other decisions get made. But so, anyways, this is arrayed from Bartlett, which is basically assessed at 59% of market value, all the way to Piermont, which probably just did a revaluation the year before, and because it would be unusual for anything to be over 100 unless there had just been a revaluation.
Those were all 20 years, those last.
Yeah, those last ones. So you could almost bet that those last group all did revals prior to the 21 ratio study. So anyways, you'll note that Lyme is well down the list of towns that are, as far as their level of assessing. The next list is the COD list, and COD is the coefficient of dispersion, so it's basically the dispersion from the median ratio. So let me show you something. It would have been ideal if I had a whiteboard, or even those cement blocks that are behind me. But let's just pretend that this is an array of like 50% of market value is down here. This is 100% of market value, and this is 150% of market value. Okay? This is going to explain why assessing, or it's going to show you just exactly how unscientific and how unexact assessing is. Okay? 100% of market value is obviously the ideal. It'd be great if you were all being assessed at 100% of market value. However, what you are currently assessed at is, what was our number for that prior one? And again, pretend this is 2021. So you are now assessed at 94.6% of market value. Okay? So you're here. Okay? And really, if everybody's pretty close to that, who cares? Because you're all slightly underassessed, right? The market's higher than that. And so if everybody's pretty close in that same vein, you're probably not going to worry about it too much. Now, unfortunately, we move on to the COD. And again, Lyme COD is not bad. I mean, you pass the litmus test for COD with the revaluation in 2021. Okay, so, and I'm going to say it's not bad, but when you hear the next thing, you're going to say, well, that's not good. So 94%, was it 94? 94% of market value is down here. Now, if Judy is assessed at 12% below that, down here, and I'm trying to remember, I should remember your name. Wilkes. All right. And Wilkes is assessed at 12.4% above market value. He's probably not super happy about the fact that she's under-assessed by 12 and he's over-assessed by 12. But if you go to the IWL standards, that's still not bad. That's still equitable assessment. Right. And there being no stones thrown at me yet. I'm just reporting this, okay? So yeah, so less than 20 even is it really depends how far out. I'm currently reviewing all these ratio studies right now. And we've got a ton of them that are over, well, you can say, well, again, you got to consider that this is 2021, and I'm now looking at 22 ratio studies, and the market's been just as crazy this last year as it was the prior year. So I'm seeing plenty of sales of statistics that are indicating, I mean, Clarksville, 35 points. So let's say that they were assessed, even if they were assessed at 100% of market value, let's just say this is the line, this is a lot easier for me to do this. This is the line, and if you're assessed, some people are assessed at 35 points above that, and some people are 35 points below that. I think we'd all agree that that's not very equitable. Okay. So the last statistic is the PRD. And the PRD is a measure of high-priced properties versus low-priced properties, and how those properties are being treated or assessed. And again, Lyme does creep up on that list, but it's still 103. The measurement for PRD is 0.98 to 1.03. That's the range. So you're in that range, again, as of 2021. I don't have figures for 2022. All right, so let me just make sure I covered the assessment ratio study. So basically, again, the ratio study is a comparison of the assessed values divided by sales prices, and then they're arrayed, and the middle figure is the one that's used to measure the median in a town.
Just double checking, are all sales used in figuring out those?
Yeah, so no, so only qualified sales are used in the ratio study, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, towards the end, because there was a question about that earlier. But basically, if you think about it, there's market sales and there's non-market sales. If you bought from your neighbor because you wanted the protection, because you wanted to buy because your mom, you want a place for your mom to live, plus you didn't want some lunatic to move in next door to you, you actually may pay more for that house than Rusty or anybody else would. Okay, so you have an inherent interest in that property. If somebody buys a property at foreclosure, or it's a bank-owned sale, presumably, well, not in this market, but in a normal market, you're going to probably get a better deal. You're going to, hopefully, if your sister sells you a house, you're going to, weasel a better deal out of her.
Not her.
Or maybe not. So anyways, the market sales, that's a very important point. The ratio study is produced by the assessor, a lot of times in concert with the town. And that's a good thing, I think, because the assessor may not know what Dina knows or what the selectmen know. They may not know that you two are related and sweetheart deal or whatever, or any number of things. So it's generally, the two tests would be the town and the assessor. There's a number of ways you can qualify sales, and I'll talk about that at the end. We talked about the 2020 sales, 2021 studies. We talked about the fact that the 2021 update was required, and that there's no 2022 ratio study yet, which would be really useful information to have for tonight. But presumably, maybe you can get it in the next couple of weeks. And we covered the 2021 rankings. So I just wanted to move on to the, just really quickly, because it's a standard. So the Assessing Standards Board is responsible for coming up with standards that are used by assessors in the state of New Hampshire, and we're administratively attached to them. So I think, Todd, you've been on the board, you've chaired the board before, I think, right? So basically, I got a seat on the board as the commissioner's representative. There's 3 or 4 assessors, there's usually a couple of legislators, and a couple of, I think Tom Thompson is of Orford is one of our public members. So if you go to the to Roman 3, just be aware of the fact that in a year of a reevaluation, we check to make sure that a COD is not greater than 20. And again, these are rules that are really promulgated by the International Association of Assessing Officials. So they're rules that don't even come out of New Hampshire, but the ASB, which is a New Hampshire organization, has adopted them as their own. And if you went around the country, I think you'd find most state boards have adopted that for assessment. If you go to go 2 pages beyond that, there's another grade in area. That's also talking about the statistics. So we look to make sure that the PRD is between 0.98 and 1.03. If you don't see, if you went to that PRD list and saw that a town was at 0.97 or 1.05, that doesn't necessarily mean they didn't qualify, because there's something called a confidence interval, which permits somebody outside that range to still be within that range. How's that for hocus pocus stuff? But basically, the smaller the town is, and the fewer the sales there are, the dicier assessing is. Okay, and unfortunately, you're in that boat. However, just be glad you don't live in Orange, New Hampshire, because they're lucky if they can get 20 sales in 3 or 4 or 5 years, maybe, in some cases, sometimes. You've actually had it pretty good the last couple of years because there's been enough sales, but I think this year we're seeing in general fewer sales because there's very little inventory out there. Anyway, I don't care if you're in Lyme or Orange. So just be aware of that. If you see 0.98 or something outside of that range, don't, it's wrong. You have to take into consideration the confidence interval, and we do that when we're doing our ratio study. And the other thing that we do look at, which is not really applicable to Lyme, is let's just say that your commercial properties were at 80% and your residential properties were at 90% after the year of a reevaluation. That would be an area that would be considered not passing because there's more than a 5% differential between between property and strata. So that's just another litmus test. So that's the assessing review standards, and again, we do this. Every town in the state of New Hampshire has to go through the assessment review process. You guys did it in 2021, at least for those categories. I think our 2021 one has not been published yet, but at least in those categories of statistics, you're good. Because do you have the one, do you have the double-sided one? Backside? Yes. I just did the front page of the ratio study, but you are true. So basically, you met all the criteria for your statistics. So the 2021 revaluation statistically was a valid effort. Some communities, as I indicated, are doing revales more often than every 5 years. And I would say that's on the uptick because of the market. Now, if the market starts getting, flat again in a couple of years, it may just go back to the 5 years. Because it costs money to do a revaluation, right? That's part of what you need to consider. And sometimes it makes sense to do a revaluation, and sometimes it's probably better to wait. And I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm just giving you some options, or going to let you know about what you should be thinking about. The first thing you should do is look at your 2022 ratio study, because that's going to really tell you what the market's doing in Lyme and how far off you are. As far as whether you want to implement a revaluation, there's the option of the selectmen have the option of introducing a warrant article. I don't know how close you are to the deadlines on that. Judy, you have a better...
We have someone in town, several someones in town, I think we're going to submit a petition warrant.
All right, petition,
And
okay.
the date for that is February 7th.
Okay. So those would be, if the town wanted to do it on their own, I think that would have already taken place, or would have had to already have been to take place. But the other option is to do a petition warrant article, and then it gets voted up or down at the town meeting. The practicality of doing a 2023 evaluation, I suppose it's possible that somebody could take that project on. I don't know if Todd's talked to the town about that at all. I don't know if anybody's read the Vermont Digger.
Yeah.
Always an interesting document. But they have a really interesting article about, not only does it talk about the fact that there's no requirement for every 5-year rebound, but they also have the litmus test there is that when the common level of appraisal, which is essentially like our ratio study, falls between 85 or outside of the 85% to 115%, you're supposed to do a rebound. So there are, according to their reporting, something in the neighborhood of 137 communities who should be doing a revaluation this year. All right, so the whole purpose of this article really was to talk about the grading of appraising. Not that we're great, but the whole point of this thing is basically saying there's not enough people out there to do this work. There's an outfit called New England Municipal Resources Center. They're saying they apparently do quite a bit of appraisal work in Vermont. They're adding that the company is currently booked through 2025 for projects. So my guess is, and maybe you've done some homework on this, but if the petition warrant article passes, my guess is that it may or may not be 2023. I would imagine 2024 would probably be the more likely thing, but I don't know that, and I haven't done any investigation on it. Yeah.
I might not be connecting here, but you said we could do our homework. If we wanted to reproduce the ratios ourselves, should we be able to see which properties were excluded and why?
Well, so you could do it, but I'm not going to say that. So basically what happens is the town and the assessor usually provide the information to the DRA. Then our Equalization Bureau comes back with any questions that they have, and we usually have quite a few questions. I can't speak for Todd's track record, but for some assessors, there's tons of questions. And they might be, what? You said this was a invalid sale. What's your criteria for that? They're required, when they invalidate a sale, there's supposed to be a comment as to why.
34 excluded sales
In Lyme?
I think there were
Out of how many? Because that's
out of 190 something.
that seems like a really high number for sales in Lyme.
We're trying to figure that out.
Okay. So
For 1 year.
When Todd did.
well, that's what they're trying to figure out. So let me just talk to you a couple of things about a couple of things that actually, even a 2-year period, there wouldn't be that many sales, I don't think. So let's just go back to that ratio study we looked at. Okay? This will give you a rough idea of how many are excluded or included. In 2021, so not the 2020, but 2021, there was a total of 44 sales in any and all strata. So that means that there was 44 sales that were 6 months before and after April 1 of 2021. Now, the next one is the sales that have PA34. PA34 is a document that's supposed to be used, it's not always used, it's supposed to indicate whether or not it's an arm's length sale. You know, you can ask 10 ways to Sunday about why somebody thinks it's arm's length or not arm's length, and you're probably not going to get good answers. Or you're going to get no answers, and a lot of times they don't turn this information in. So I'm going to get to that in a second, as far as other ways to qualify sales. But if you go, again, total strata the total was 44, and the valid ones were 24. So you're roughly going 50%, and I don't think that's a bad number. It's going to depend on the market. It's going to depend on where you are in the state. There's certainly parts of the state where there's more. I bet you actually in your town, because I remember my wife still, we moved out of town 7 years ago, and we are still on the listserv. So let's face it though. You know how you sell property here in Lyme, right? I mean, it may go through Martha People of Real Estate or somebody else, but there's a lot of properties that say, oh, we're going to be listing our house next week with Martha, but if you have an interest or know somebody else who's got an interest, give us a call. So you probably have a fairly high percentage of sales that are non-brokered sales, and it's hard to imagine that they wouldn't be considered open market sales if they were, if they were on the market on the listserv. Now, whether somebody's going to know that or not remains to be seen, but so just be aware of the fact that there's other ways to sell a property. So anyways, in that case, we had 24 out of 44. And in the prior year, you had total strata was 52, and you had 24. Okay, so, 50 plus or minus, and I think that's not a bad rule of thumb. So roughly 50% of the sales are not going to be valid sales. So as far as the qualification, at the last page I provided you is a full list of all the sale codes or sales, the reasons the sale would be excluded. I mean, there's quite a few. And there might be multiple reasons. It was a piece of current use land and my neighbor bought it, or it was a butter sale, or it could be 3 or 4 reasons. So the assessor is supposed to put down the best reason that he considers an unqualified sale and why is it unqualified, with a code that matches this list of codes. Then it comes into the DRA. We have a bureau of 3 or 4 people that review every sale to make, basically going to double check. Not every sale is going to be, reason to double check, but basically, whether it's Manchester or Orange, if they have any questions, they're going to call the assessor or call the town and double check on why they said this was an unqualified sale. Yeah?
Is it good to tell the assessor, for instance, if you've done a 1031 exchange and you're running up against a time deadline, you might be going to pay a lot more than you ever would have?
Yeah, I'm not sure what code that would be, but Todd might know. But anyways, it's that would be something that you would want to let the assessor know, and that would, potentially be a sale that would be considered not distressed, but an urgent sale. There's quite a few codes there. And to the question about current use, so current use land is assessed on its agricultural capability, not on market value that's established by the assessor. So that's why those are thrown out. Now, there was a question that came to me by Rich Brown, and basically was asking, is it possible to put those sales back in? Okay, so for our equalization study, they're not going to include those. However, we can do a trial ratio study, or Todd could do a ratio study for you that actually keeps those in there. So for the purposes of, keep in mind, our ratio study, the predominant reason we do a ratio study is to apportion values in communities that share school districts and bring them to a common level of assessment. So I now live in Jaffrey, New Hampshire, but Peterborough, New Hampshire is part of the Condell School District. Might have heard about it, there's a little lawsuit going on. Claremont 3. But basically, you got seven, or it's either 7 or 9 districts, or towns that feed into one school district. So Dublin might have done a revaluation this year, it might be 100% of market value. Peterborough might have done it 2 years ago, it might be at 80% of market value. And Bennington might have done it 4 years ago, it might be at 60% of market value. So the primary reason that Linda Kennedy equalizes and does these ratio studies is to basically bring everybody to market value. So in other words, Dublin is still at 100%, Peterborough comes up 20%, and Bennington comes up 40%. And basically to get everybody to a common level so that everybody's paying their share based on recent sales. Because some towns that did revals 4 years ago and some towns are doing them this year. And the idea is to level the playing field for apportioning contributions for common school districts or the county. So basically 2023, the practicality of doing a revaluation, it's entirely up to the homework that maybe you've already done. I would say that the 2022 ratio study would be the next step for you. And I think the other question was, again from Rich Brown's group, was that what is the citizens' remedy? I'm going to just read these. That's all right.
Go ahead.
I could show you some of our homework,
So what?
some of the homework that we've done.
Okay. So I saw some of it, so a couple of things that I want to point out, because I think I heard rumblings about a revaluation, or about the revaluation that happened in 2021. We thought that it was statistically valid, and Phil's crew reviewed sales that were used in the analysis that Todd put together. I don't know how many of you have looked at the use pack manual or the use pack book that's at your town hall, but it's public information.
We've tried.
Okay.
We also know that there are properties that were included that shouldn't have been, and there were properties that were excluded that we can't find documentation for why they were excluded.
Okay.
So we have questions.
Okay. And have you broached that with the Board of Selectmen or the
Yes.
assessor? Okay.
Maybe.
Okay. I would say the only other thing I could say is that our Equalization Bureau could report to you what we have for sales from 2021, but presumably so could the town.
So we know how to calculate the CRD and the PRD, and your summary and statistics that you've shared with us are fine, but we would like to see the list of properties that you've used and to do those calculations.
Sure. We can put that.
When we hear a report back from,
I'm working on that right now.
Okay.
He sent me a list, there's a whole bunch of stuff.
Okay.
Just explain to her.
but when Todd reports back that a preliminary study shows that the COD is within parameters, he doesn't share the list of properties that we've included.
Right.
And we can see the Grafton County records,
Yeah.
and we can tell who has transfer taxes, and we can do our own analysis. And
Well-
I have some other information I'd like to share with you.
The equalization report that we do will list all those.
So I think
That's the reasons
and I
why.
think I heard Dina said that she was going to provide that. I don't know if that was for
I
2021.
thought she was talking about the 2021, I didn't know she was talking about
She-
2022. I'm doing that.
I'm trying to resolve the 30 properties that have been excluded without documentation. There's also the 3 that were included that we know they shouldn't have been. We've got an example of sales chasing apparently in the data. We have some, I'd like to share with you
Okay.
some
Well,
graphs.
happy to take whatever we have. Is this for 2021?
It was.
We started with 2021 and we've gone forward.
Okay. Because I will say that I know that the evidence that was provided to me regarding the 2021 that I saw was largely comparing taxes and how the low-end values seem to go up in value at a higher rate than the high-end values. I'm here to tell you that happened throughout New Hampshire. And if you did, like you had, was it Carroll that you had? Oh, Carroll's probably a bad example, but we had some towns that did revals this past year where some portions of the town were at 50% of market value, like some property types, like mobile homes, okay? And some were at 80% of market value. So when there's a reval that's done after that, the mobile homes are going to go up. They're going to double. And the single-family homes that were at 80% are going to go up 20%. So know that the part of the statistics are just representing what's happening in the market. After a revaluation is done, the subsequent sales are going to indicate, what things are selling for after the fact. And some of those are going to be, depending on the market for those properties. Mobile homes in Rockingham County have been you're looking at this mobile home park and be like, how come somebody would spend $300,000 on this? It's affordable. It's the only affordable property in Rockingham County. And it's, so we're happy to take back whatever you have for questions.
Can we hand out this?
Sure.
Should we hand it, Rich, you want to hand out?
Is that something I've already got?
No, we finished the informational part.
Yeah.
Right? And then if you want to stay and do all that, we can.
Okay. So as far as the rest, so basically, there's, one of the questions was, what if we think that something's wrong? Okay. And I don't know if you're talking about 2022 information. 2021, essentially, that revaluation has sailed. If you've got a complaint, you have some options. I always recommend that you talk to the assessor or the Board of Selectmen. In the year of a revaluation, you should definitely be attending hearings when you first hear about a new value that you don't understand. And then there's also BTLA. And the BTLA has quite a few options. BTLA can basically hear an abatement, an appeal of abatement, so that's like a one property situation. They can also, I'm going to just quote this is a little bit different than the regular, but that a particular parcel of real estate or item of personal property has not been assessed, or that it has been fraudulently, improperly, unequally, or illegally assessed. It's a little bit more of a, it's more of an innuendo that there was something that was maliciously done. Then item 3 would be, when in the judgment of the board, determination is in accordance with 71B16A, any or all the property in a taxing district should be reassessed or newly assessed. And then when a complaint is filed with the board alleging that all the taxable real estate or taxable property in a taxing jurisdiction should be reassessed or newly assessed, and that would be your classic petition. So that's what happened in Hanover. They got 50 signatures, and that achieved a revaluation in Hanover. And then finally, when the Commissioner of Revenue Administration files a petition, and again, a lot of times those last two work hand in hand. So that was a petition warrant article. We looked, Phil did a lot of hard work, spent a lot of time in Hanover, and they essentially changed their assessors. They did a top-to-bottom reassessment, literally a full measuring list of all properties over a 2-year period. And so those are really if you think something's wrong with either your property or your neighbor's property, the most direct line is to go to your assessor. But if you feel like the assessor's not doing their job, don't forget the municipal assessing officials are truly the assessing officials in your town. And what else? Oh, and then I got a scatter diagram from Rich. Sorry, I didn't have. It's on 2 pages. But essentially, you know, I don't really know what to make of it, only in that there's a list of 42 sales. I don't know if these are qualified. I find it hard to believe that there's 42 qualified sales. But it was over like a 15-month period. I would rather speak to an equalization ratio study that has been provided first from the assessor, and then that our group has reviewed it, and then, you know, talk about the numbers. I do, Rich's concern was that the high-priced properties are being under-assessed. And if you look at that PRD list that I provided, you're going to see the majority of the properties are the higher-priced properties. And I've done lots of appraisals up here over the years. Higher-priced properties are the hardest properties to appraise, because the market gets more and more imperfect when you're talking about 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, $4 million. Because people would, you know, as we know, people have moved here from out of state, sold their place in California, and, you know, this was a steal when they bought the place at $2.5 million. I'm not saying that Todd's values are 100% right, but with the high-priced properties, what was that old term from the 2000s? Irrational exuberance. Right? Well, there gets to be more and more irrational exuberance the more somebody's got, the more money somebody has, and it's always hard to peg the high-end value. The appraiser, luckily, has the opportunity to go to Hanover or Woodstock or somewhere else and try to find a similar property. But if it's an antique cape on 100 acres and it's the only sale that's taken place in the last 3 years that's similar to that, it's going to be pretty hard to nail that number. So.
It's not random though, it's a general trend. The percentage difference is significantly different.
Right, and so that's why that PRD list I showed you, that's a random trend across this entire state, because it's difficult to be able to get those numbers to hit the high price properties. So going back to that one, we have Romney was at 1.30, okay? So that's like way out. That is way, and then if you go down to, you know, everything in that first column is kind of out of whack. And actually, all the way until you get to 1.03, which is 2/3 of the way down the second column. It's a little bit hard to read this too, because these numbers don't have that confidence interval built into it, like your town would when we do our review of your particular ratio study. So, let's see what your PRD shows when the new ratio study's out. I mean, again, I wish it was here, because I can speak to it. I don't know what that number is. I don't know what the median is. I don't know what the COD is. I mean, we can guess at it, but I don't even trust, no offense, Rich. Rich and I go way back. He tried to teach me how to jump rope. I don't know if these are qualified or unqualified sales. All I know is there's 15 months worth of sales, and it doesn't seem like there would be that many sales. And so there may very well be some high-end properties that are still being under-assessed, but it could change the statistics. Until Todd submits a ratio study to us, and we review it, we don't consider it final. So,
well, who can check Todd's? You're checking Todd's work. Can we check Todd's work too?
yeah. So this is once.
Can we go to Grafton County?
No, this is a fair question. So once that ratio study is complete, then you can either get that from us. You should be able to get it from the town, and that would list all the sales that were qualified and all the sales that weren't qualified. Absolutely.
I just want to say that 2022 ratio stuff right now, I can't release from your board. I was told not to.
It's not complete.
You have to wait until it's done.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
21.
I'm just making that point.
Yep.
21 that you can get.
21,
You can
absolutely.
look at all the
but
sales
not
and values.
22.
Yeah. So basically, each one of those sales needs to be qualified and then rechecked by us. And, you know, we may take out two, we may decide that every one of them is perfect, or we may add two. And then we push a button and all those calculations occur. And once I sign off on it, which is usually within 24 hours, from the time I get it from Linda Kennedy, that's then a finalized study. And if you, that's something I can provide to you.
So have you done the reassessment, all those sales, have you checked off on those?
Yeah, our equalization bureau would have checked off any of the sales that occurred
And can
during
we
the
now
term.
see why the properties, the 34 were excluded?
Yeah, I would suggest we can ask her that. You certainly can't ask me that because I don't know.
Because we've really been struggling with this for a year.
Yeah.
You make it sound like we don't know what we're doing, but we're really trying.
Yep.
For 21 you're talking about?
Yeah.
That would be the 21 report.
Right. So it's important also to realize that your municipal assessing officials do sign off, or have the well, they actually do. They have to sign off on the report.
They had 1 day to do that, less than 24 hours to sign off on it. There's no way they could read 500 pages in a USDA report in 1 day.
500 pages of what?
The USPAP report, they had
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the equalization study. So the equalization study is just a list of the sales. It basically it's a summary just like that 2021. It's actually a little bit different, but it's a different format. But it basically has all the statistics that are found, you know, in this report that you've got a copy of. And then it's attached to that is all the sales that were used by the assessor and that were approved by the town. So, and again, rechecked by our department. So our equalization bureau. So if you, I don't know, you can ask for a list of the sales, Dina?
For 2021?
Yeah.
Yes, and like I told, Evie sent me a list, and she wants answers as to why they're included or why they're excluded, which is what I'm working on.
Okay. So if I can provide you with a list from the department.
And I sent her the ones that were in the portal from 2021.
Okay.
I just have to send her the reasons why they were excluded.
Yeah. It should be right part of the equal.
We've excluded all the current use properties.
Yeah.
Which we don't agree with.
They do that now, it's
Done.
New Hampshire standard, they do that.
Right. Yeah, and I talked about that earlier. We can do a trial for the 2022, we can do a trial run to see what would change as far as the statistics go, if you included those. But it's a standard operating procedure that we, for the purposes, again, that Linda Kennedy's doing this for kind of a different purpose, and we get the benefit of median ratios and CODs and PRDs. She calculates the weighted mean, which is the one, it's a different number rather than the median price, which is what we're measuring Todd's work with as far as the level.
Would we pay extra for that, or is that part of the?
No, you can put in a right to know request and we'll provide you a list of sales as soon as we have those. And I've got one more item, and I just wanted to mention that you asked about the qualification of sales. And let's see, qualification of sales. So sales can be qualified in a number of ways. Probably Todd can speak to this, but really the best way to qualify sales is really a conglomeration of, any number of ways, but a deed's going to tell you one thing. A deed's going to say, oh, it's a fiduciary deed that's between a brother and brother. Yeah, throw that out. Or if it's a LL, there's corporate transfers that you're going to throw out. And then you're going to be left with a subset of sales. And that subset then you could go through, you could look at MLS. All the assessors in the state use MLS. Now they can tell when, and they can call a broker. If they're not sure, they can call a broker and say, yeah, I know this went through the MLS, but that doesn't mean that it's a arm's length sale. It could have been between two neighbors. Again, you've got this little dicey thing called a listserv. I would think I would consider that if it saw adequate market exposure, I would consider that a good sale. So, I mean, if it's a sweetheart deal and you bought it from your neighbor over here, then not so much. But sometimes it's hard to know. It's not always black and white. So what's a good sale and what's not a good sale? That's why we question the sales. There's the PA34, there's the deed, there's MLS, there's questionnaires. Do you guys use questionnaires here? I think you do, or you used to. Dean,
I'm sorry.
do you use questionnaires?
No.
Okay. I think, did
Diane did.
Okay. Sometimes you use a questionnaire, and they send it to every new property owner saying, hey, welcome to the neighborhood. We wanted to know whether this is an arm's length sale. And again, I would say it's questionable reporting sometimes when you get it. You got to question those. Because they can say, oh yeah, this is an arm's length sale. And you find out it was their brother that sold it to them. So, yeah.
Wanted to switch fields a little bit here. I think we did allude to the fact that there could be a warrant article asking for a full revaluation. You talked about a full statistical revaluation, and is that a less intense process? I mean, what?
Not as far as the revaluation goes. So, a revaluation, a cyclical revaluation, which is what you're doing, is just the marriage of two processes. Of doing a systematic measuring and listing of the town over a certain number of years, and then doing a full statistical revaluation. A full statistical revaluation means that you are you're doing it, pulling sales from the community, using market sales. Again, you're looking for market values. We want market sales. That's and then using those sales to derive values for everybody in town. Who's got the harder job? Him or me if I'm appraising a property? I got it made. Because if it's a log home in Lyme, I'm going to probably go to Orford, Hanover, maybe Enfield, maybe, I'm going to probably try to compare it to 3 other log homes. Or a really high-end home. Or an oddball home. A home with a bomb shelter. The lender's going to say, well, we want to see another home with a bomb shelter. Right? Well, his job as an assessor would be, he has to use these 20 sales, or whatever they are, and apply values to everybody in town in Lyme, no matter whether they have a ranch, a colonial, whether it's worth $350,000 or 3.5 million. He has to come up with a model and then apply square foot costs and various factors for various things, from views to waterfront to neighborhoods, and apply it to everybody. And that's why when I say plus or minus 20% or 10% is, unfortunately, it's equitable assessing.
Right.
Can I just add something?
Yeah, absolutely.
When you have a small number of sales, the assessor's typically going to use like 2 years worth of sales, which is probably what you
Can't
get
hear
right
you.
now. So,
You can use the mic.
Sorry.
so when you have a small number of sales, like you had, he's probably going to look at 2 years worth of sales to get a bigger sample. I believe that's what Todd did. So rather than 21, he's going to have 44 or whatever.
So it's those factors that go into the modeling that could be adjusted through a full statistical revaluation. Because when we looked at the latest revaluation, we had $1 million properties that went down in assessment appraisal. And
So that would be a mechanism.
and then sold for $1 million above their appraised value. So the whole point of the RS 75 is equitable and proportional burden of taxes. And we can see, looking across properties, that the lower end properties taxes went up 8.8%, and the high end properties went up 4%. And properties, we have a bunch of land values in town, went down 20 to 50%. How does land and value in Lyme lose value?
Right.
And it's because of those factors that are in your camera modeling that are not being, you're not exercising the right influences.
Right.
And so a full statistical reevaluation would be an opportunity to fix that.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's essentially what was done last time, but with, again, the only difference between what Todd did in 2021 was that he was in the midst also of a cyclical inspection schedule. What's the end of your 20% schedule, do you know?
I think we should be just about done. There were a couple of years where I didn't do a full 20%.
Okay. I mean, there's nothing to say that you have to necessarily finish it either. I mean, there's nothing to say that you're contractually bound to, finish measuring and listing all the properties in town. It just means that you might have 60% of the town that has been measured and listed, and the other 20% or 40% maybe hasn't been listed for a number of
So
years.
part of the problem was that the whole revaluation was done kind of late in the process, and we didn't have a chance to see the results of that analysis and then see if the outcomes, I mean, the intent is equity, but if the outcome is not equitable, then things need to be rethought, is according to RSA. You can't have different proportions for different value properties.
Right.
And that's what the outcome was, but we couldn't know that until the whole evaluation was done, and we didn't have time to appeal it. And in fact, individual citizens have no recourse to say, all you can say is that my property was overvalued. You can't say, well, that guy over there, how come his $1 million estate has gone down $150,000? I'm not allowed to say that in any legally binding context that requires an answer.
Yeah, you can. You can file an abatement on another property.
But I don't want them.
I know.
I want his property to be correctly valued.
Sure.
Say that in the abatement, because,
What's that?
I think you could actually do that in the appeal and could indicate that you feel that's unfairly assessed, but I'm not positive of that, but I believe that's the case.
So, yeah, you can file an appeal on your behalf because you feel like your property is incorrect, but also on against another property, which it's a hard thing to do. We don't want, everybody's going to be filing appeals against each other. To reiterate, you have the option of doing this full statistical reevaluation again. It would be considered, here's the other bonus of doing that, okay? That would start the clock again in 5 years, okay? So it's not like you would have a new one due in 2026. So if you get to it if you find somebody who can do it this year, then it would start your new clock over, and your next clock would be 2027, okay? And just in case Dina's wondering, we also have an assessment review schedule, which is a 5-year schedule. That can be either reset to be on the same schedule, or which is good to do in general, but it doesn't have to be. So if it ended up that your next assessment review is in 2026, and your next reval was either this year or next year, and then the next one after that was down the line, it's not the end of the world. But here's the thing, we don't know what the market's going to be doing in 2024 either. So, because I don't have a crystal ball, as you know, as I've already claimed twice, right? It's going to be interesting. I don't think, personally, you're not building a ton of houses, but there's a lot more apartments probably being built down in Lebanon, so probably it's going to affect the market down there more. But Lyme is all about scarcity, right? So, yeah.
So you know me, Mr. Current Use.
Yeah, you're not going to start with current use.
No,
That's a different topic.
But I am going to ask you one thing, and that is why, if we're paying Todd to assess or appraise the town, and I believe he's doing the work now too, aren't you, Todd?
Yes.
Yeah, so his contract is to appraise the property. And we're not doing your studies based on appraised values. We're doing our studies based on the assessed values, and that's why we're throwing out all the current use properties. If you put the current use properties in, but then just use their appraised value rather than their assessed value, can't you do your studies based on that?
Right. So you and I were talking about that, right? Earlier?
So Todd could property sales and his sales analysis, he thought they were good sales. It's just the DRA throws them out for the equalization survey. So there's two different things there. I don't know if that's what you're.
Well, in a
Maybe
sense,
saying
yes.
they never looked at it all, and it may very well have been reviewed in his analysis.
Well, that's the confusing part, because when we look at the review of his 2021 assessment, he used current use properties to do that.
And he can, if
But-
I used to use.
But any review that he's doing now, he's throwing out the current use property. So
Well,
it's
that's a
like, well,
different
wait,
thing.
which way do we
Equalization
go?
is the state's review, so that's, they don't allow it.
Right.
The assessors can use it.
For the purposes of doing analysis and reporting their analysis, their ratio study can look totally different in their use bad report. But for the purposes of, Linda's statutory requirement to do a ratio study, she's required to throw out but that should not affect, or doesn't need to affect, his decision-making as far as
It's
analysis.
40% of properties in Lyme are current use.
Yeah.
And if you think about who has current use, it's the higher end properties.
Yeah, no, point taken. So we could do a trial ratio study for, again, we need to get the study first before we can do anything for 2022. So that's my takeaway is 2022 is, it'd be nice if we had that, but we don't.
Well, you know, that
Yep.
we're close. We've answered all the questions that they've asked, so we'll see. I'm sure they'll turn it around soon. Don't you think?
I would think.
Okay, I'm sure Natalie's working away on it.
Yeah, Natalie's probably waiting with bated breath. I think
She's still there?
Huh?
She's still in the office?
Yeah.
No.
All right, any other questions, I guess? All right, well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.